Welcome back to Mountain Murders Offbeat. I'm Heather.
And I'm Dylan.
And we've got your midweek mini episode ready to go.
I think that's the best thing about Offbeat. It reminds people you're halfway through the week.
Yeah, it does. And we're actually going to be out of town this week, so we're trying to get Offbeat and Mountain Murders in the can before we exit stage left.
Yeah, we have things we're going to go do and have some fun, but we always want to make sure we take care of our listeners.
We sure do. So this week's Offbeat, I actually conferred with some of our patrons in our Discord chat, and they were excited to hear today's topic.
Yeah, and it's a very interesting topic. I'm sure some people may have heard of it, but I always find it fascinating.
We're going to be talking a little bit about Point Pleasant, West Virginia, and the legend of the Mothman.
Ooh. Wow, I guess we could call that a cryptid, right?
Yeah, definitely a cryptid.
Yeah, and I've always found the Mothman legend very interesting, and because some people aren't sure if he's a harbinger of, if he causes the events that happen, or if he's just there to let you know,
like a messenger.
Yeah,
and they say don't shoot the messenger.
That's right.
I have to confess, I don't like moths.
You have a never-ending battle with moths in our bathroom.
Yeah, well, we don't have a screen on the bathroom window because we are janky and trashy.
A little bit. And we also have a fluorescent light.
Trashy is our aesthetic.
We have a very odd lighting system in the bathroom.
Well, that's because our bathroom's like 100 years old.
And so they love that fluorescent light. So every time Heather goes in there, it's an all-out war with whatever species moth has showed up.
There's these gigantic moths, and they're like furry looking. They're terrifying, and they love me, and I think it's because I'm pasty white, so they think that I'm a light source or something.
I could see that.
But I'm just really pale, and so they always flock to me, and they're these big fucking moths, and they're all hairy and gross looking, and if you smash them, they're like made out of dust.
There's no fluid in them at all, right?
I don't even know, because you smash it, and it's just like a poof of dust. So I'm like, how do these moths even exist?
Maybe they're not real moths.
Yeah, they're cryptids. They're like Mothman. They're like mini Mothmen coming to terrorize me.
Well, that makes sense.
Okay, well, let's get on with our story, okay? So now that I've confessed that I have a really irrational fear of moths, let's talk about them. Point Pleasant is a small town situated along the Ohio River. It was originally established as a military fort back in 1774, and it gained notoriety for a battle that took place there. At the time, the area was settled by white Americans, and this became a point of contention between the reigning leader there, Lord Dunmore, and the local Native Americans. So we got the white folks moving in, taking over the area. And, of course, Native Americans not real happy with this. Many would go on to consider the Battle of Point Pleasant a part of the Revolutionary War, but some people think that it's more of a tipping point in Lord Dunmore's personal war. The leader of the Native American Army, who went by the name of Chief Cornstalk, would later go on to be betrayed and murdered by Virginians under the guise of peace talks, and he would be buried in what is now Point Pleasant. So many consider the later events of Point Pleasant to be Chief Cornstalk's curse upon this area. A curse upon your land.
Well, I think that would be a easy story to come up with. The white settlers came in, pushed their way in. I mean, there's no way around that. And the Native Americans didn't like that, which you can't blame them for that. And Chief Cornstalk, it sounds like, put up a pretty good fight.
The mysterious events surrounding Point Pleasant began November 2nd of 1966. So at this point, the area of Point Pleasant was just a small town with a few thousand people living there. It was a town steeped in history and the type of place where everybody knows everybody. That kind of small town.
Yeah, I'd say it's the kind of place where people don't lock their doors. People say hi and wave to everyone. That type of charming little place.
A man named Woodrow Derenberger was a traveling salesman who lived in Mineral Wells, which was another small town about an hour northwest of Point Pleasant. And as I mentioned, Point Pleasant is located there on the Ohio River, and it seems like this guy Woodrow Derenberger was kind of working on this particular night, driving down I-77, which I think is across from like Point Pleasant on the other side of the river. And he's driving down I-77 when this mystery begins to unfold. Now, he says it was about 7:30 p.m. while he is traveling home that he is stopped by the bright lights of a car-like vehicle, which is hovering inches over the ground.
Oh.
And now, according to Darren Berger's testimony, this vehicle passed him on the road before pulling in front of him and causing him to slam on his brakes. Something emerged from this object and walked toward the passenger side window of his car. At the same time, the object moved upward some 50 feet. The man introduced himself as a searcher and brought words of happiness. So after noting that he was going to come back again, this particular man stepped back into this object and it rose out of sight.
Oh, my God.
Darren Berger went home and told his wife the story. Then he called the police and the local press. 2 days later, while driving in his car, he began to receive a telepathic communication from the man he had seen earlier. He described himself as from the galaxy of Ganymede. He also supplied some information about his life, including the observation that people on his planet lived from about 125 to 175 Earth years.
Wow. So if I came home and told you this story, what would you say to me?
Well, first, I would be like, how many beers did you drink on your way home?
I knew it. I knew that you would accuse me of being drunk.
Or high.
Or high. Oh, Lord, I don't do anything like that.
I'd be like, did you eat some acid on your way home? Like, what the fuck are you talking about?
Yeah, so I could imagine his wife's taken aback by this very strange story that he's telling her.
So over the next couple of weeks, some other stories sort of began circulating that would substantiate some of Darren Berger's story, including some independent UFO sightings, which had happened on November 4th. An initial investigation concluded that Darren Berger was not a fraud or a hoaxer, but the idea that he was suffering from hallucinations could not be ruled out. So throughout this period, Darren Berger's direct contacts with the man from Ganymede, whose name was Indrid Cold, continued. He learned much about Cold's people and their desire for friendly contact. He clarified his home was on the planet Lenulos from the Ganymede star cluster. In 1967, Cold took Darren Berger for a ride in his spaceship, and they visited Cold's home planet.
Whoa, oh, now, I didn't know this part of the Mothman story.
Yeah, okay. All right.
Yeah.
So because they were able to speak telepathically, he was always grinning, and this earned him the future moniker of the Grinning Man. Now, like I said, it's pretty interesting to note that the sighting was reported the night of the supposed encounter. When you can go actually listen to interviews of him talking about this taking place. And so this just happens to be when some of the weirder things start to happen in Point Pleasant. So let's talk a little bit about Woodrow Darren Berger. He was a 50-year-old sewing machine salesman. He was married and had multiple children. And he seemed to be living the American dream. By all indications, he was just an average guy that you could expect to find in West Virginia in the mid-1960s. But these claims that he made brought his reputation, his name, and his sanity into question. His claims were kind of ridiculous sounding, but they were big news in the area, and he found himself in the spotlight with a lot of public scrutiny. Many began to camp outside his house. People were hiding in trees or in the shadows, hoping to find some trace of these UFOs he had spoken about.
Yeah, I think people tend to forget that during the 50s and into the 60s, this country was kind of obsessed with the idea of the future and space and spacemen. The sci-fi really took off. I mean, to the point that some of our national park areas and monuments actually have a sci-fi futuristic feel to them.
Clingman's Dome is a prime example.
Yes,
in the Great Smoky Mountains.
Yes, and I would say the observatory there at Fontana Dam as well. Having visited it looked like something from the Jetsons. So the nation was very, very kind of fascinated by the idea of UFOs and aliens.
Now, people who lived in this area where he claimed to have had this encounter reported some similar sightings. Now, no one else had claimed to encounter this telepathic speaking man named Cold, but people had seen bright lights in the sky, dating back, as I mentioned, to November 4th, but there were even earlier reports that people had seen them on November 2nd. These lights supposedly moved far quicker than any man-made craft known at the time and seemed to stop and go, occasionally floating in a manner that would seem almost impossible at this time. Darren Berger claimed to communicate with Cold again just days afterward, but he says these communications solely took place in his own mind, and that Cold was able to communicate with him despite not being nearby, and that is when he learned all about the home world Lanulos. Darren Berger would later go on to write his memoir about the encounters, Visitors from Lanulos, which was published in 1971, a very limited publication.
Well, I could imagine.
However, Darren Berger would spend the rest of his life defending his sanity. Unfortunately, those few weeks of fame would cause him to lose his job, his marriage, and even custody of his children. However, despite his entire life seeming to fall apart over the next few years, he would never recant his claim. He personally considered his version of the truth to be the truth, and that he had actually communicated with the Grinning Man, an alien presence that he said never brought good news.
Yeah, and I think that's a common thing. These people who recount these interactions with aliens and having been abducted and things like that, it typically does pretty much ruin their lives. You know, they have to move away from maybe the small town they live in, or find a new job, and they catch a lot of hell for making these claims.
Now, a few weeks later, and the local area had many people supporting the claims of his timeline of events, these people claiming that they had seen these bright lights in the sky. It was November 12th that things took an even more interesting turn. So just a few weeks later, there were 5 men working as grave diggers in the nearby town of Clendenin, which is about an hour southeast of Point Pleasant. These 5 men claimed to see a large winged creature emerge from a nearby patch of trees taking flight. This creature, which was shaped more like a man, but with wings that looked like some sort of recognizable bird. So a man with these big bird wings quickly flew over top of the 5 of them, coming close enough to scare and intimidate the men. This would be the first sighting of the creature known as the Mothman, but it certainly would not be the last sighting.
And, you've got to take the word of a gravedigger, right? Why's he got to lie?
Right.
They seem trustworthy to me.
Not like they would be drinking and digging graves or anything like that.
Oh, Lord, no. Or just creeped out from the very fact they're digging holes in cemeteries for bodies.
I want that job.
You would do that job.
I would love that job. Don't have to communicate with anybody. Get to hang out in the cemetery where it's nice and quiet.
So these gravediggers made the first report of what would go on to be the Mothman.
Yeah, that this man with very recognizable bird-type wings flew down close enough that it scared the absolute shit out of them, right? 3 days later, on November the 15th, a man named Newell Partridge was sitting at home. And by the way, I think Newell Partridge is like a great name.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome.
That needs to be like a character, like a superhero. Newell Partridge is the Mothman. So he's sitting at home watching TV, and it was about 10:30 in the evening. It was all quiet and dark around him in the small town of Salem, West Virginia. So just for a point of reference, Salem is about 2 hours away from Point Pleasant, and it's further northeast than Mineral Wells, where Darren Berger lived. Suddenly, a loud whining noise breaks out of his farmhouse. So he is like, what is this? Turns the TV off after it turns to static, which is weird. So he's sitting there, here's this loud noise, TV cuts to static, he turns it off. Partridge would later describe this sound as a loud metallic whining, similar to like a generator starting up.
Okay.
His dog, a German Shepherd named Bandit, began to bark and make its way to the door. So Partridge opens the door for Bandit, and he's kind of hoping that maybe he'll investigate the cause of this sound, the television interruption, and of course, just let the dog out. You know, he thinks the dog is going to be able to go figure out what's going on. He has a flashlight. That's the only thing he's armed with. And he follows Bandit out to the barn about 500 feet away from the farmhouse. Partridge shines the light into the barn, finding only big red eyes staring at him in return.
Oh no.
Can you imagine?
I would defecate on myself.
Newell Partridge runs back to his house, hoping that he'll have time to grab his gun. But by the time he was able to get the gun, he realized that he was too terrified to go back outside and into the barn and face whatever had been looking at him.
That's probably a good call. The
No.
safest call.
Yeah, well, according to rumors, Newell Partridge never saw his dog Bandit again after this happened.
So Bandit disappeared.
Bandit vanished. So that wasn't the only sighting that would be seen of the supposed Mothman on this particular night. He would be spotted back in Point Pleasant over 100 miles away a few hours later. During World War II, a section of woods outside of Point Pleasant became home to the West Virginia Ordnance Works. This organization was in charge of manufacturing and storing explosives for the war effort, and they stockpiled many explosives in steel bunkers that the local folks called igloos. However, in the decades after the war, the explosives remained in the bunkers, and the area ended up being reclaimed by nature. Now, to this day, many of the bunkers remain untouched and has become known as the TNT area to many people who are from the Point Pleasant area. On this particular night, November the 15th, there were two young married couples, Roger and Linda Scarberry and Steve and Mary Mallett, who were hanging out in this TNT area. I mean, I guess we can all guess what they were there to do. They were young, and for whatever reason, young people like to go explore places like this.
Yeah, but that just seems like a slip up by the government. It seems like they should empty those bunkers of the explosives and do something with them.
This TNT area is located in a heavily wooded area. There's a lot of wildlife there. And of course, it's known as something of a lover's lane.
Have you ever went to a lover's lane with someone with a bow?
We don't have any lovers types of lanes around here. I don't feel like.
No, there doesn't seem to be a prominent one. There's some dirt roads here and there. They've all been claimed by gentrification and subdivisions now, right?
Yeah. Why do you ask? Do you want to go to a lover's lane?
I would go to a lover's lane with you.
Let's go make out.
I think our driveway's a lover's lane.
Yeah, well, it could be.
Ooh.
It's secluded. And I don't think we have fear of cops shining a flashlight in our face.
And then we're still near a bathroom and stuff.
Okay.
Sounds convenient.
Still have access to the fridge and snacks?
Yeah.
Okay. So they're hanging out, TNT area. They've got an explosive love affair next to the dynamite.
Oh,
you like that?
I like that.
Yeah. Their love's so hot it could combust this shit. They got to watch out. So a short time after Newell Partridge's encounter with the Mothman some hours away, these couples have their own. While they are driving towards their destination, the couples in the car spot a large presence just outside of a power plant. By their descriptions, this creature stood well over the height of an average man, with great bat-like wings folded behind its back. All four of them shared similar recollections, but made an extra note that the creature had large, glowing red eyes.
Wow. So now there's this full description of the Mothman that will live on for years to come.
The couples then sped off. They were frightened by the sight of this creature. They headed back to Point Pleasant, and the couples reached speeds upwards of 100 miles per hour on the freeway, but the creature easily was keeping pace with them. Now, according to these couples, the creature flew alongside or just above them, his red eyes haunting them most of the way home.
Oh, see, that would be super freaky. If I've caught a glimpse of something, I'm not sure what it is, so I peel out of there. And I'm driving dangerously fast.
That's when I'm shouting out the window, "Fuck this shit."
You're driving dangerously fast to get away.
What do you want, Mothman?
And this creature is just easily, without effort, it seems, keeping up with you flying 100 miles an hour.
Now, in this car, we've got the Scarberries and the Mallets, and they began to near the town of Point Pleasant. And when they do, that's when the creature seems to back off. So the two couples, still reeling from fearing for their lives, they race to the nearby courthouse where they meet up with a deputy named Millard Halstead, which is another fucking great name.
That's a great name for a deputy.
Millard Halstead. I know, I like that. Now, Point Pleasant is the type of small town where everybody knows everybody, as I mentioned before, so Halstead was familiar with these two young couples and knew that whatever was panicking them had to be taken seriously. Because he knew these were not kids who got into trouble, they were just like nice young people. So he listened to their story about the events and took it as truth, which is kind of surprising because you would think hearing a story like this, most cops would be like, what have you been smoking?
Well, most people, period.
Right.
Let alone the cop, thinking it's some kind of prank or, they've done some type of drug to maybe make them hallucinate, maybe.
So this is when the legend of the Mothman was born, and the area of Point Pleasant would never be the same. So following this panic story from the Scarberries and the Mallets, the town of Point Pleasant held a press conference to reassure the citizens of their safety. These sightings were nothing more than modern ghost stories, could easily be explained by hysteria, or, just some sort of fear getting the better of impressionable young people. They're just feeding off of each other's fear. It's okay. Don't worry. At this press conference, the leadership introduced the likelihood that this creature that had been seen by these couples was a sandhill crane.
Oh, so just a big bird.
Sandhill cranes are large birds with skinny legs, but their wingspan can go up to 6 feet. That's big.
Yeah, it's pretty big.
Sandhill cranes are also noted for their amber-colored red eyes.
Okay.
That can appear much darker in certain light. These cranes frequent many areas in North America throughout the year, so it is a valid explanation for this phenomenon. The sand crane is also used as an explanation for the popular Jersey Devil myth and several other cryptids.
Maybe the Thunderbird as well?
Probably. I was trying to think of what the name of those birds were.
Yeah.
I was like, what are they called? Firebirds? Thunderbirds.
That's it.
However, the Scarberries and the Mallets reiterated how much this figure looked like something else. They said it had the arms and legs of a man. It had those bat-like wings and red eyes that were so large, they distracted them from seeing anything else of this creature's head. The two couples described the creature as abnormally fast and that it sort of ran in a somewhat clumsy motion. So the night of the press conference, a group of armed men went into the woods near the TNT area, hoping that they could hunt down this alleged creature.
That's interesting that they say it ran in a clumsy motion, because if you've ever watched birds run, they're not great runners typically, because they have their wings to account for, tucked back, and however they're tucked back behind them. So that's kind of interesting. Like, it's not as comfortable on the ground as it is maybe flying.
Right. Something to think about. So I'm just thinking about these guys going in the woods, like, woo, yeehaw, make some of your, like, white guy redneck noises.
Woo!
Yeah. So
get them.
You're out in the woods with their guns.
Yeah, they're out there. Yeah, hold my beer for a second. I'm going to show you something.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what I imagine. So the local press, trying to make light of the situation, decided to call this creature Mothman, like mockingly, as if it were some kind of villain on like the Batman TV series or something. However, this name would stick. The Mothman, as we know him today. So abnormal stories began coming out of this area of West Virginia, and it began to attract a lot of people, including renowned ufologist John Keel. He was later interviewed by David Letterman about his experience visiting this area. So during the 1960s, John Keel was this up-and-coming writer who specialized in these sort of abstract stories. He was an Army veteran, had been in the Korean War, and was no stranger to facing like unknown situations. He was specializing in writing stories about the weird, the peculiar, the paranormal, even writing some television screenplays for some TV shows in the 60s. But in the fall of 1966, he was focusing on the burgeoning UFO phenomenon that was sweeping the nation. While he began to write about these UFO sightings that were happening daily all over the globe, he decided to focus on this hot spot of Point Pleasant, West Virginia, because not only do we have this one UFO story, but now you have a Mothman. Over the next year, Keel interviewed over 100 witnesses who had seen the Mothman, all of these supposed sightings occurring in or around the Point Pleasant area. Most of the stories were the same. This creature was large, shaped like a man with a colossal wingspan, and had large red eyes that would either entrance the people who saw it or intimidate them and cause like major fear and panic. So one of these sightings occurred just a day after the Scarberry mallet sighting, which would have been November the 16th. On this night, a bright red light was spotted in the sky above the T&T area, close to the home of Ralph Thomas and his family. So a neighbor of the Thomas family named Marcella Bennett, drove to the Thomas family's house to try and find out what was the cause of this glowing red light. She is like very interested in figuring out what's going on. When she gets out of her car, she had her child in the back seat. But as she's getting the child out of the back seat, she's startled by some kind of movement on the ground next to her. It seemed as though it had been lying down, she would later say. She continued, whatever it was rose up slowly from the ground. A big gray thing, bigger than a man with terrible glowing eyes.
Oh my God.
Apparently, this Mothman began to walk towards Marcella and she froze. According to her, she even dropped her young child for a moment before recovering this baby and racing towards the nearby house, which the Thomas family let her in.
Dude, maybe you shouldn't go searching mysterious light sources with your kid. Just saying. I bet the kid's like, I would have rather stayed at home, Mom.
Well, the story continues that Marcella Bennett and the Thomas family hide inside the house, even as the Mothman creature paces around their patio, peeking into windows with his large red eyes. It wasn't until the police arrived that the creature had finally left, and the entire Thomas family, they were absolutely terrified, and Marcella Bennett was labeled as like traumatized by the experience.
Wow. So they all saw it walking around outside, peering in the windows, got a good look at it, right?
Yeah, it's a peeping Tom. It's a peeping Tom.
And it's a peeping cryptid. And they're just, they're scared out of their wits.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Marcella Bennett would spend the next few months going to therapy sessions. She was so traumatized that she had problems functioning normally in her own home, which was on this really isolated edge of Point Pleasant. So she lived kind of like way out, and she was so terrified of what she had seen that she didn't even want to like be at home alone in her house.
Well, I mean, I don't know what she saw, but if you think you saw something, real or not, you're still going to be scared, right? If you believe it.
But a lot of people didn't believe Marcella and thought that she was just part of a big hoax, despite the fact that her health and well-being were like seriously impacted by this event. And she wasn't alone. The Thomas family had been visiting, that she'd been visiting on that evening, had backed up her claims and say they saw exactly what she had seen. And they were just two of the hundreds of witnesses to this Mothman creature. And so Keel would interview not only Marcella Bennett, the Thomas family, but also these hundreds of other witnesses who had seen this creature. Keel would stay in Point Pleasant for about a year, diving into the case further than he could imagine. He began to connect this local UFO sighting and this Mothman creature to a number of animal mutilations that had been happening in the surrounding areas, making this one of the focal points of his writings. In 1967, Keel was also the one who began to popularize that term, Men in Black, which refers to the alleged government boogeymen that began to visit Point Pleasant after these sightings, supposedly.
Oh my God, they had Men in Black too?
Supposedly. Now, Keel began to take note of weird occurrences happening to himself and others as he was connecting the story. Mailed documents were changing overnight. Phone lines would go dead or were being tapped. UFO witnesses were feeling threatened. He began to attribute these sporadic events to the alleged Men in Black, believing they were trying to silence the story or at least quiet these witnesses. These Men in Black would remain a constant part of the Mothman story, but would also become relevant kind of later on as we get deeper into the Mothman. So throughout his months in Point Pleasant, one of Keel's main acquaintances was a reporter named Mary Heyer. She worked for the Athens Messenger out of Athens, Ohio, which was about 40 miles north of Point Pleasant. They had a sister newspaper in Point Pleasant, and that's how this reporter, Mary Heyer, became involved in reporting on the Mothman. She was just as interested in the Mothman and UFO sightings as John Keel was, but she was coming, at it from like a much more different point of view. Like, she's interested as a reporter, and he's interested as like trying to prove that this is all real, if that makes sense.
Yeah, maybe she's coming at it more of a skeptic point of view.
Yeah.
Like, why are these people saying that they're seeing these things?
Yeah.
What's really going on, kind of thing?
Yeah, that kind of thing. So in the latter half of 67, the Mothman case was kind of beginning to die down. So Keel would spend less and less time in Point Pleasant, and he would return occasionally to get an interview with a new witness or two. But I guess he wasn't spending as much time there as he had in the first part of the year. But during one of these trips, it was Mary Heyer that picked Keel up at the airport. She told him on the night before he had returned, she had a terrible nightmare of people drowning among Christmas presents. It was easy to excuse that silly nightmare, but John Keel made note of it for his later writings. Now, just a few weeks later, after he returned home to New York, he began to have strange premonitions of his own. He would claim that he personally began to get messages from the long-forgotten Indrid Cold delivered through his telephone, warning him to stay away from Point Pleasant.
Oh, so the alien's back.
Yeah. And Keel was going to stay away in those final weeks of 1967, so he didn't have any plans to go back to Point Pleasant. But it was on December 15th of 1967 that tragedy struck Point Pleasant. Around 5 p.m. in the evening, during rush hour traffic, the 700-foot Silver Bridge crossing from Point Pleasant over the Ohio River collapsed.
Yeah, and I think this bridge collapsing is really what catapults the Mothman story up into a couple of notches higher into like legendary status.
It does. So dozens of cars collapse into the freezing cold river below, ultimately killing 46 people. 2 bodies were never found.
Yeah, it's a horrible tragedy. You think a backed up bridge full of cars and then a complete failure of the bridge. It wasn't just part of it or this lane. I mean, it was a complete failure there in the middle, I think it was. And that's just horrible. I couldn't imagine being on that bridge when it gives.
No, it's very scary. Multiple others suffered injuries or, extensive trauma with this bridge collapse. Many victims having been witnesses of the Mothman creature. Constructed in 1928, the Silver Bridge had long exceeded its expected lifespan without any serious upkeep. It had been used to carry heavy loads, like much heavier than they had originally participated, and they had done absolutely no work to this bridge since the 20s.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to get truly terrified, take a glance at the state of our infrastructure throughout this entire nation. Dams, earthen dams, bridges, they all, most of them get like a C or D rating on how good they're holding up.
It's actually pretty terrifying because I'm surprised this hasn't happened more.
Yes, I am.
Of late.
Yeah, I am too. I am too.
Regardless of whatever paranormal sightings or happenings, this bridge collapse was a serious tragedy, and it brought light just how seriously maintenance is needed to maintain human safety. So as you were talking about our infrastructure, Dylan, it's just a reminder that we really need to be investing more money in these types of civil engineering.
It's literally crumbling. Well, some parts of this country are running off 100-year-old systems as far as the grid and the sewer systems and things go in some of these large cities. And it seems to be all our politicians can do is talk about it and politicize infrastructure spending, which I don't agree with at all. That should happen, period, right?
Yeah.
That should not be up for debate.
It shouldn't be. That should be one of our main focuses, right?
Yeah.
But in the days and weeks following this bridge fiasco, news media was once again all over Point Pleasant. Buying into the myth that had been established over the past year, this narrative began to spread that the Mothman was himself responsible for the bridge collapse, and that he had been spotted by certain witnesses the day of the bridge collapse. Many claimed to have seen the Mothman earlier in the day or on the morning of the tragedy, which was an omen of things to come. However, the Mothman was never spotted in Point Pleasant again by any number of people. It was as if on this evening of December 15th, the presence of the Mothman died along with the victims of the Silver Bridge collapse. Now, despite the bridge collapse marking an end to the Mothman sightings, the town of Point Pleasant wasn't entirely done with weird happenings. So, the reporter for the Athens Messenger, Mary Heyer, was now acting as a Point Pleasant correspondent. She saw her work overload increase drastically in the weeks and months following the bridge collapse. Once she was, enticed by the sightings of the Mothman, she turns her focus on those involving the dancing lights in the sky, which continued even after the bridge collapse. On one weekend, shortly after this tragedy, she recalled getting over 500 phone calls from citizens who reported seeing these unusual lights in the sky. But on one evening, which was in January of 1968, just a few weeks after the collapse drew attention, Mary was visited by a strange man in her office. It was late at night, and Mary's office was located in the Point Pleasant courthouse, and she didn't often receive visitors. This man, who was described as very short with an oddly shaped long hair bowl cut,
Oh, wow.
wore these thick glasses and had what Mary called a hypnotic gaze. He terrified Mary, and he spoke in a low voice, and he had a stutter. He wasn't interested in talking about the Mothman or the bridge collapse, but was very interested in finding out who exactly had spotted the lights in the sky. So during their conversation, this man kept inching closer and closer to Mary, and she started to feel threatened by him. She called out for her boss just before this man turns to leave. Then the guy paused and picked up a pen from her desk. Laughing, he took it and ran out of the office.
Okay, that's pretty creepy.
Now, rumors claim that this man visited many of the homes in the area of the people who had spotted these lights in the sky. So, according to these rumors, he made all of these people feel very uncomfortable. He started telling people he was a reporter from Ohio. However, he knew nothing of the Ohio area and would simply disappear as he arrived, and would often disappear as soon as people started asking him questions.
Well, yeah, I mean, that guy has a particular look, so it wouldn't be hard for people to connect the fact that he's talked to multiple people. He has this weird haircut, it
I
sounds
mean,
like. Short, stutter.
Yeah, so there's been questions about whether this man even existed, but it's one more of those weird, strange events that seem to happen around Point Pleasant, West Virginia. And of course, following this, Point Pleasant would never be the same again. The tragedy had a major impact on the town in the following years, seemingly changing the town overnight. In the 1960s, there was some sort of kind of like a wild-eyed optimism about UFOs. But after the collapse of the bridge and this tragedy that allegedly involved the Mothman, it seemed to turn the town more somber. In the following years, the Mothman would become a thing of urban legend, a dark omen of things to come. Then in 1971, more than 3 years after the tragedy, an investigation into the bridge collapse came up with a reason. There was a small defect to the bridge's suspension eye bar, less than a tenth of an inch deep, that had been the culprit of the collapse itself, setting off a chain of events that would take the lives of 46 people. This would eventually lead to an overhaul of the maintenance standard for states around the country. In 1975, John Keel brought the Mothman legend back to life with the release of his book, The Mothman Prophecies. It detailed his descent into madness as the events of 1966 and 1967 unfold. And a lot of people see it as a book about one man's paranoid delusion. It became the main reference source for people who believed in the Mothman myth, and a lot of people say it's kind of hard to read without having a truly open mind.
Okay, and I wonder if that's what led to the Richard Gere movie.
Yeah, actually, I was going to get into that.
Oh, sorry.
So, well, Point Pleasant would mourn and eventually recover from this terrible tragedy that left many of their neighbors dead. Over the years, the city began to recover and reclaim their town from these paranormal claims that had taken over. But of course, whispers of the Mothman and UFOs would never actually leave. So now the town of Point Pleasant, synonymous with the Mothman legend, has devoted some museums, and they have stores selling merchandise inside the town itself. It's kind of become like a marketing tool for the town. In 2002, a generation after the tragic bridge collapse, they began to celebrate a Mothman festival annually. So they are fully like embracing this. And then, of course, the Mothman Prophecies, the movie, loosely based off Kill's book starring Richard Gere, hit theaters, and it's a fictionalized telling of the Silver Bridge collapse. And it was somewhat of a box office hit.
Yeah, I think for the type of movie that it was, kind of paranormal, supernatural, whatever, I think it was pretty big when it came out. People were talking about it. And I think you should just embrace it when you have something like this happen. And if you can make some money off of it and it help create jobs in your area and put some money in people's pockets, I say go for it. And they even went so far as to do a pretty rad statue, right?
Yeah, there is a really cool statue. Our friend Gary has a photo posed in front of it that he's shown us
it's a scary statue.
So talk of the Mothman will never actually fade away. People are very interested in cryptology, the study of these creatures, from the Loch Ness Monster to the Mothman to the Thunderbird you mentioned, Dylan, Jersey Devil. Like, people are very interested in this cryptozoology. It's become part of West Virginian lore. Many people still claim to spot the Mothman before other accidents or tragedies. And one of the most notable of these is known as the Chernobyl blackbird, which was a creature allegedly spotted hours before the major nuclear meltdown in Russia.
Ooh, I did not know that. Did you know the Loch Ness Monster could have been a whale penis?
A whale penis?
Yup.
Just chilling in the lake?
Well, they flick it up out of water, and it's really big because it's a whale, and it looks just like the Loch Ness Monster.
In a lake?
But, well, I don't know. Is it freshwater?
I think so.
Well, because it's a freshwater whale, dude. Don't shoot me down.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that has been the story of the Mothman, and to be honest, I didn't know that there were like UFO sightings tied to the Mothman.
Now, that I found interesting, and I did not know that as well. I didn't know that had that connection or happened before the Mothman kind of took off. Haha. And, but you know what I find interesting? So let's say it's not anything supernatural. It's not a creature. So what explains all these different people? Is it mass hysteria? Is it kind of people wanting to be in on the story or be a part of the story? What do you think?
I really don't know. I think anytime you have a large number of people coming forward describing the same type of scenario, the same creature, almost down to, like every single detail, it seems to me that it's more than just a mass hysteria.
You think so?
Yeah.
Yeah, and anytime you get hundreds of reports in the same evening about strange lights, then the people definitely saw something. We just don't know what they saw.
I'd like to say I'm a believer. I mean, I don't know for sure if there's a Mothman, if there are aliens, UFOs, but I'm open to the idea of it. And I do think there's a lot of UFO, strange light phenomena sighting in the sky. And just the fact that that coincides with then seeing this Mothman, I don't think the two are related. But I do believe that, people do see strange and unexplainable things.
Well, yeah, you better hope there's not a Mothman because you've been killing his babies in our bathroom.
That's true.
Yeah, he's going to get you.
Oh, no. Well, don't say that.
What?
You know I don't like moths. That would be terrifying. I don't want a Mothman to get me. If I killed him, would he be made of dusty shit too?
Well, I don't know. We got to set up some kind of big, kind of cartoonish hammer trap.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Or like an anvil, like we could get from the Acme company.
Yes.
Okay.
Or a piano.
So I didn't know all these things about the Mothman, but it's a pretty interesting story, and I would like to take a trip to Point Pleasant sometime.
Yes, I would definitely like to go up there and see...
the museum and see the statue.
Yeah, and see the bridge that fell. Because crumbling infrastructure is one of my favorite pastimes.
Yeah, he really does like that.
I can't wait to get back to Detroit without kids hanging off my skirt so I can truly take a good look at the crumbling city. It's very sad. And to this day, I'm amazed that a major American city's
Been
being
allowed to fall into such disrepair
man.
and decay.
I'm telling you what. As soon as you get away from downtown, because the downtown still, even though it seems kind of abandoned, it doesn't seem busy for a downtown. Still has the GM headquarters, all these big buildings.
Big casino.
Yeah. As soon as you get blocks away from downtown, it looks like a damn post-apocalyptic, cityscape.
Oh, well, I guess our listeners are probably like, why is he talking about Detroit? I guess because our road trip will be going to Michigan.
Yes. We are
So-
going to go to Michigan, and I always have to go through Detroit when I go up there.
He loves it.
But I got to be careful. They say it's dangerous.
Yeah?
Yeah, they say you can get fucked up in Detroit as soon as you get out of downtown area, so you got to be careful.
Well, maybe don't go someplace and get fucked up.
Well, and you know what? I love all the people that live in Detroit. Just know that.
Yeah, well, it is Detroit Rock City.
It's true. A lot of history there.
Okay, so that has been the background of Point Pleasant, West Virginia, and the story of how the Mothman came to be.
Ooh, and it's funny how he's never seen again, really,
Never seen again, really.
after that accident. So did he cause the accident, or was he trying to warn people that the accident was going to happen?
Well, that is the big debate, Dylan. Is he good or is he bad? Well, he's a moth, so I think he's bad.
All right, well, thanks for listening. And if you want to get more Mountain Murders, you can check us out where, Heather?
Patreon.com/Mountain Murders Podcast. You will access exclusive Patreon only content, stuff that's just available for patrons. You will have ad-free episodes. You can become part of our Discord chat. And if you sign up at our higher levels, I host a solo true crime show where I will give you even more true crime cases.
Yes, Heather's been doing a lot of her solo acts lately, and she does a very good job.
I just posted a 2-part series on the Long Island serial killer, also known as like the Gilgo Beach murders.
Oh, man, that's such a crazy story.
It's a really long 2-part episode hosted by yours truly.
Yes, and if you have questions or comments, you can hit us up at mountainmurders.com mountainmurderspodcast@gmail.com.
He always does that.
That's
So
why I
funny.
let her say it. And yes, we love to hear from you guys and
And
gals.
we'll be back on Sunday with a brand new true crime story, one that you've likely never heard.